Respect. It's one of the few things money can't buy. But what happens when a billionaire insults a waitress in a language he thinks she can't understand, only for her to answer back fluently in his mother tongue? Today's story will remind you that no matter how much power or wealth someone carries, dignity and respect can never be taken for granted. On a warm Thursday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona, the sun cast a golden glow across the city, and inside one of its most exclusive restaurants, everything seemed designed to whisper wealth. The marble counters gleamed under soft lighting. Polished wood tables shone as though buffed between every seating, and even the gentle background music felt carefully chosen, soothing enough to calm nerves, yet refined enough to remind you that this was a place for the elite. The air carried a quiet tension unique to expensive dining rooms, where every clink of glass or scrape of a fork sounded magnified against the hushed conversations of high-paying clients. Waiters and waitresses moved in unison, their steps practiced, their balance perfected after countless double shifts, weaving between tables like dancers on a stage. In that seamless rhythm of service, one woman stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried herself with a subtle confidence that refused invisibility. Her name was Danielle Rhodes. She wasn't the kind of waitress who faded into the background, the type customers forgot the moment they left. With dark hair pulled back neatly and a notepad always ready, she embodied professionalism without slipping into stiffness. Her smile, polite but never forced, carried warmth without begging for approval. For regular customers, Danielle was more than just the woman who delivered their meals. She remembered orders without writing them down, asked about families with genuine interest, and carried the rare ability to make even hurried businessmen pause for a moment of real human exchange. Behind the apron and polished shoes was a woman who treated her work not as a burden, but as a craft, and that quiet dignity made her unforgettable to those who noticed. But that afternoon, sitting at the corner table by the wide glass window, was a man who didn't notice. He was the kind of guest who entered a room expecting it to bend around him, and in his presence, the air itself seemed to stiffen. His name was Fareed Al-Mansouri, a billionaire businessman from Dubai, in town for a series of meetings that, if gossip among the staff was true, involved properties worth more than the restaurant's annual revenue. He wore a tailored suit that seemed cut from shadows, stitched with precision, its price tag likely higher than a waiter's yearly salary. A heavy gold watch glimmered each time his hand moved, catching the light as if to remind anyone nearby of its weight and worth. Fared didn't just carry wealth, he weaponized it. His aura radiated entitlement, the kind of authority that said without words, "I get what I want, when I want it." When Danielle approached his table, pen poised and voice steady, the energy shifted. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Can I start you off with a drink?" Her tone was calm, respectful, professional. But Farrad didn't look up right away. His attention was locked on his phone, thumb scrolling with a sharp impatience that suggested the screen mattered far more than the living, breathing person waiting politely at his table. Seconds passed. The pause stretched long enough for nearby waiters to glance over, sensing the weight of the silence. Finally, he flicked his eyes up, gave Danielle a quick scan as though evaluating a piece of furniture, and muttered flatly, "Water with lemon." Nothing else. No greeting, no smile, not even a hint of gratitude, just clipped words delivered like orders to an employee already beneath his notice. Danielle gave a small, practiced nod, the kind servers perfect after years of enduring such encounters. "Of course, I'll bring that right out." She turned to leave, maintaining her composure, but in that exact moment, Fareed's lips curled into a smirk. Leaning toward the younger man seated across from him, a junior associate eager to impress, he muttered something low in Arabic. Even without understanding the language, the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't casual, small talk. It was the sharp, cutting rhythm of insult, The kind of remark spoken freely only when you're certain no one nearby will ever understand. His associate gave a hesitant chuckle, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the man who held his career in a grip stronger than gold. By the time Danielle returned with the water, she had already caught the rhythm of his words. Arabic wasn't foreign to her. Though Farid couldn't possibly know it, Danielle had grown up surrounded by the language, carrying it not from a textbook but from memory, family, and life itself. Every syllable he thought was a hidden barb landed with precision in her ears. Yet she set the glass down gently, smile intact, eyes calm, betraying nothing. Farid barely acknowledged her, already tossing another comment in Arabic toward his companion, followed by a dismissive laugh. The arrogance rolled off him like perfume, filling the air with an unshakable sense of superiority. To everyone else in the restaurant, it might have seemed like just another wealthy client with his nose tilted too high. But Danielle knew differently. She heard every word, felt every insult, and though she didn't flinch, a storm had begun to gather inside her. Years of waiting tables had taught her to endure arrogance, to treat rudeness with grace, to turn insults into silence. But this wasn't just another rude guest. This was someone who had crossed an invisible line, dismissing her not only as a worker but as a human being. And though her face stayed composed, her heart steady, Danielle Rhodes had already made a quiet decision. She would not let this moment pass unanswered. The stage was set, the players in place, and though Farid believed himself untouchable, he was about to learn that arrogance often blinds a man to the truth standing right in front of him. Farid's voice grew sharper with each passing minute, his words laced with the kind of venom only arrogance could sharpen. At first, his comments had been quiet, almost playful in their cruelty, but now they came in waves, each remark deliberately louder, as though he enjoyed the sport of mocking someone who could not answer back. He leaned casually in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, his gold watch catching the chandelier's light as he gestured toward Danielle with the subtlety of a man who thought himself untouchable. In Arabic, he whispered to his associate, "Look at her posture, bent like a servant who doesn't know her place. Even her smile looks borrowed." His companion forced a polite laugh, the kind that trembled at the edges, but Farid pressed on, savoring his own performance. "She moves as though she belongs here," he added, lowering his voice further. "Yet, look at her shoes. Cheap, like the rest of her. A waitress pretending at dignity." Danielle heard it all. Every syllable cut into her with the precision of a blade honed on pride. On the outside, she remained composed, her features arranged into the practiced mask of professionalism she had worn for years. She took his order for the entree with steady hands, thanked him with the same warmth she gave to any customer, and walked away as though nothing had been said. But beneath that calm surface, something deeper stirred. The words stung, not because they revealed truth. Her shoes, though modest, were polished clean, and her posture was steady with quiet confidence, but because they echoed the disdain she had battled her entire life. His insults weren't simply about her role as a waitress. They were a declaration that service meant lesser, that humility equaled weakness, and that those who worked with their hands could never hold their heads high. Danielle had been trained for this. Years of balancing plates and swallowing pride had given her the armor of silence. She had learned to take a deep breath when customers snapped fingers at her as if calling for a dog, to smile when someone left without so much as a thank you, to let rudeness slide like water over stone. But Arabic was not just a language to her. It was memory, family, and identity. To hear it twisted into a weapon against her was different. It wasn't just mockery, it was a desecration of something sacred. As she refilled glasses at another table, her mind drifted back to Morocco, to summers spent in her grandmother's kitchen where the air always smelled of cardamom and fresh mint tea. Her grandmother's voice still lingered in her memory, warm and textured like the woven rugs that lined the old house. It was in that kitchen where she first learned Arabic, not as stiff syllables from a textbook, but as songs, as lullabies, as prayers whispered before sleep. Her grandmother had taught her that a language was more than words. It was history, culture, and spirit, a thread connecting generations. Danielle remembered sitting cross-legged on the cool tile floor, repeating phrases until her tongue wrapped around them with ease, her grandmother's gentle laugh filling the room whenever she stumbled. Those memories weren't just lessons in speech. They were lessons in pride, in belonging, in dignity. Now, standing in the restaurant's sleek interior, surrounded by polished marble and whispered English conversations, Danielle carried those lessons like armor. Every insult in Arabic struck her ears, but behind them rose her grandmother's voice reminding her, "The tongue is a gift. Use it to lift, not to break. Use it to show respect, not to take it away." Fared's words may have been meant to humiliate her, but to Danielle, they only reminded her of the deeper weight language carried, the power to harm, but also the greater power to heal and to stand tall. Back at the table, Fared was relentless. He leaned in again toward his associate, his voice laced with cruel amusement. "Even her eyes betray her," he said in Arabic, nodding subtly in Danielle's direction. "She thinks she matters here, but all she'll ever do is carry plates, for men like us, nothing more." His laughter rang low, self-satisfied, bouncing off the polished surfaces like a note meant to sting. Other customers began to notice, not the words, for they didn't understand, but the way his tone shifted when Danielle came near. There was something in the cadence of his laughter, in the way his eyes narrowed, that sent a ripple of discomfort across the dining room. Heads turned. Forks paused midway to mouths. The atmosphere, once serene, began to feel heavy with unspoken tension. Danielle continued her work with a grace that belied the storm within her. She delivered bread to a nearby table, topped off wine glasses, and answered questions about the menu as though her heart wasn't burning. Every step, every motion was measured, balanced, calm. But inside, her grandmother's words beat like a drum, and the memory of Morocco's sun-drenched afternoons wrapped around her like a shield. She knew what she was hearing was wrong, cruel, and undeserved. She knew also that silence had its place, but so did truth. For now, she held her peace, letting Fared believe he had the upper hand. He smirked after each insult, confident in his invisibility, certain that his words would remain his secret. Yet, as Danielle stood just within earshot, her eyes calm and her hands steady, she was already preparing. He didn't know it yet, but every word he spoke was building toward a moment he could not control. A moment when the language he thought was his weapon would become the very instrument of his undoing. The breaking point came without warning, though in truth it had been building with every word he spoke. Danielle approached the table to check on their meals, her expression steady, her tone professional, when Fared leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a sneer that carried both amusement and malice. He turned to his associate and, in Arabic, spat the words with deliberate cruelty. "She doesn't even deserve to touch the plates she carries. A woman like her exists only to serve, invisible, replaceable, nothing." His laughter followed, low and arrogant, a sound that seemed to scrape against the polished calm of the dining room. Danielle froze for half a second, her breath catching, as the sting of the insult sank deep. But then something inside her shifted. The patience she had guarded like a shield gave way to something stronger, something steadier. Resolve. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder beneath its surface. In flawless, fluid Arabic, she replied, I understood every word you just said." The sound cut through the air, silencing the clink of cutlery and the soft hum of conversation. It was as if the restaurant itself inhaled and held its breath. Heads turned. Forks hovered mid-air. Fared's laughter stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as if someone had ripped away the curtain he had hidden behind. The mask of untouchable. Arrogance cracked in an instant, and for the first time since he had entered the room, uncertainty flickered across his face. Danielle stood straighter, her voice neither raised nor trembling. "You speak of me as if I am beneath you, as if my work makes me invisible," she continued, her Arabic flowing with perfect ease. "But I heard every insult, every word, and let me remind you, when you demean me, you demean the language. You speak, the culture it comes from, and the dignity it holds." Her eyes did not waver, her tone remained measured, and her words landed like stones cast into a still pond, sending ripples through the silence of the room. Faird's associate shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Danielle and the billionaire, clearly wishing to vanish into the linen-draped table. Around them, other customers leaned in, curious but silent, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding before them. Danielle continued, her voice soft but unyielding. "My grandmother taught me this language in her kitchen, in a home filled with love and humility. She told me, 'The tongue is a sword. Use it to cut down pride or to lift someone up.' Yet you," she paused, her eyes fixed on Farid, "have chosen to wield it as a weapon of cruelty. You may have wealth, you may command respect in boardrooms, but here, today, your words have revealed more about you than all your riches ever could." The restaurant manager, alerted by the sudden hush in the dining room, hurried over. He looked. Between Danielle and Farid, his brows furrowed with concern. Before Farid could unleash the fury burning behind his eyes, the manager spoke firmly, his voice carrying authority. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I must ask you to treat our staff with respect. Danielle is one of our finest servers, and this establishment will not tolerate disrespect, no matter who it comes from." His words only deepened the silence, sealing the moment like a judge's gavel. Around the room, customers exchanged glances of approval, some nodding subtly, others murmuring in quiet agreement. One older gentleman near the bar muttered, "Just," loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She's braver than most I've seen." A woman at another table leaned toward her companion and whispered, "About time someone stood up to him." The tide in the room had shifted. Where once Farid had commanded attention with his wealth and presence, now Danielle stood as the center of the story, her quiet strength undeniable. Farid's face flushed, the arrogance draining away, replaced by a tight, brittle mask of anger and humiliation. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time, the sword of language was not in his hand, and the silence that followed exposed him more brutally than any insult could have. He reached for his glass of water, his hand unsteady, and drank as though the simple act might steady his fractured composure. Danielle, meanwhile, remained calm. She did not gloat, did not smirk, did not twist the knife. Instead, she gave a small, respectful bow of her head and said in English for everyone to hear, "Respect matters more than riches. Without it, even the wealthiest man is poor." Her words carried across the room like a quiet anthem, and the murmur of approval grew stronger. Farid sat frozen, stripped of the control he so often wielded, left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own arrogance. Danielle stepped back, her duties not abandoned but elevated, her presence transformed from server to teacher, her poise a living lesson. And though no one clapped, the silence was its own standing ovation. For in that moment, it was clear to everyone, the billionaire had been humbled, and the waitress had revealed herself as far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The weight of silence clung to the restaurant after Danielle's words, heavier than any outburst could have been. Farid, who only minutes earlier had filled the room with his laughter and arrogance, now sat rigid in his chair, his once smug expression wiped clean. He picked at his meal without appetite, each bite mechanical, as though chewing gravel. The power he had wielded so effortlessly was gone, slipping through his fingers like water, leaving him bare and exposed. His gold watch still glimmered on his wrist, but the shine seemed hollow, meaningless in the face of the quiet dignity across the table from him. Danielle moved about her duties with the same composure she had carried all along, her steps unhurried, her voice calm, treating him no differently than any other guest. Yet that very restraint was what stung most. She had chosen not to humiliate him, though she easily could have. Her strength lay not in tearing him down, but in refusing to descend to his level. Faird's associate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For most of the evening, he had laughed at Faird's remarks, played the part of an obedient shadow to a man whose wealth dictated loyalty. But now, seeing the billionaire diminished, he found courage where silence once lived. He glanced at Danielle with something like respect, then back at his employer with hesitation. At last, he spoke in careful Arabic, low enough for the table but clear enough to be heard. "She is right," he said softly. "Respect is worth more than pride. You should not have spoken that way." The words struck harder than Danielle's, calm rebuke, because they came from someone within Faird's own circle, a man conditioned to agree, finally choosing to oppose him. For the first time in their partnership, Farid had no answer. Around the room, customers continued to watch with quiet fascination. Some smiled subtly when Danielle passed, their eyes carrying gratitude not just for her service, but for the lesson she had delivered. A woman at the corner table gave her a nod of solidarity, while a man near the bar raised his glass ever so slightly, a silent toast to her courage. Even the staff, though trained never to interfere, carried a new lightness in their movements, pride shining in their eyes each time they crossed paths with Danielle. She had not only defended her own dignity, she had defended theirs as well. Every server, every cook, every unseen hand that kept the restaurant alive. As Danielle returned to Farid's table to clear a plate, the billionaire looked up at her. Briefly, his gaze stripped of arrogance, replaced with something more complicated. Shame, perhaps, or the dawning realization that money could not insulate him from truth. His lips parted as though to speak, but Danielle offered him no chance. To regain control, with the same calm tone she had used all night, she said quietly, "Respect matters more than tips." The words were simple, but they landed like a final chord to a song already complete, echoing not only in his ears but across the room for everyone to feel. Faird lowered his eyes, unable to meet hers, and said nothing. He finished his meal in silence, each forkful heavy with humiliation. When the check came, he signed it quickly, sliding the leather folder across the table with a hand that no longer seemed steady. He left a generous tip, more out of habit than intention, but Danielle's earlier words rendered it meaningless. Money could not erase the memory of his behavior, nor could it buy back the respect he had squandered. When he finally rose to leave, his posture lacked the commanding presence he had carried into the restaurant. The man who had strutted through the doors as though he owned the world now walked out as just another customer, no more powerful than the strangers who watched him go. His associate followed, but not before giving Danielle a final glance of acknowledgement, a quiet apology offered not in words but in eyes. The billionaire's reputation remained intact on paper, in boardrooms and headlines, but within those marble walls, in that small pocket of Scottsdale, it had cracked beyond repair. Danielle stood by the window for a moment, exhaling slowly, watching him vanish into the desert night. She did not smile in triumph or savor his humiliation. Instead, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had stayed true to herself. She had protected her dignity, upheld the lessons her grandmother had instilled, and shown that strength did not always roar. It often whispered, calmly, firmly, until it could not be ignored. The narrator's voice rose gently, carrying the lesson forward. Respect is not optional. It cannot be purchased, traded, or demanded. It is given freely, and once lost, it is almost impossible to reclaim. Dignity is priceless, and the strongest lessons often come not from the powerful, but from those we underestimate. Danielle's story was not about victory over a billionaire. It was about a reminder to us all that the way we treat others, especially those who serve us, reflects the truest measure of who we are. And so, as the restaurant returned to its gentle rhythm, as glasses clinked and conversations resumed, the story lingered like a shadow over every table. A waitress had stood against arrogance, not with anger or cruelty, but with grace and truth. Her strength had reminded an entire room, and perhaps even the man himself, that wealth may buy luxury, but it will never buy respect. The call now falls to us. How do we treat the people who carry our plates, who open our doors, who make our lives easier in countless unseen ways? Do we dismiss them, mock them, treat them as less? Or do we honor them with the dignity they deserve? Remember Danielle's words, respect matters more than tips. And in our own lives, may we choose respect, always.